very clear is that birthright citizenship was established under the U.S. Constitution under the 14th Amendment. So the president's um, argument that he could simply revoke it by writing an order on a piece of paper raises considerable constitutional claims as to whether or not he actually has the authority to do so. And I'll talk a little bit about where the litigation is at right now at this point, but it has been before the Supreme Court most recently. In addition to that, he's also taken broad actions with respect to revoking humanitarian protection from individuals from countries including Afghanistan and Venezuela under the temporary protected status. He's also issued an executive order that claims to be targeting individuals who are engaged in anti-Semitic activity as the basis, revoking students' visas and arresting individuals who have been engaged in protests who are critical of actions that the state of Israel has taken against Palestinians in the Middle East. And I would also like to comment that in addition to these executive orders that have been issued, particularly with the second executive order, where there's been several different arrests and detention of individuals who were here in the country on valid visas under this order, arguing that they were a threat to national security. He's also asked the Department of Homeland Security, particularly Immigration's Customs Enforcement, ICE, to attempt to cooperate with local law enforcement in order to conduct raids in immigrant communities and deport people who don't have valid immigration documents, which also raises considerable claims about their rights being violated because they're going under the guise of warrants for arrests without going through the court system. I think all of these orders, as well as a lot of the rhetoric that we're hearing from the administration and administration officials, is particularly troubling because in addition to the actual laws that he's trying to change and alter as the president, he's creating an incredible amount of fear and uncertainty in communities around the country. We've heard instances of people afraid to go to the hospital, afraid to send their children to school, afraid to even go to houses of worship that he issued, which basically said that he would rescind the safe spaces memo. So historically, in the Department of Homeland Security in enforcing immigration laws, has recognized there are certain places that they should not be going into to check in someone's immigration status, in particular hospitals, houses of worship, and elementary and secondary schools. The idea being that this is not the place to conduct immigration enforcement, and that these people should be allowed to worship, seek medical care, and have their children receive an education, which, by the way, those children are constitutionally entitled to under a U.S. Supreme Court decision. But now those raids are taking place in those spaces as well. So there's a lot of fear here in the United States right now for people who are here on valid status. I have students who are very, very frightened right now that are in my class about whether or not Immigrations and Customs Enforcement can come to the classroom, can come onto campus, can ask for them to show their documents. So there's been some litigation that has been started. I'll talk primarily about the first two executive orders, well, the third one as well. But so the first one challenging birthright citizenship, come onto there's campus, three sets of litigation cases that are working their way through the courts. The state of Washington, the state of New Hampshire has filed, or ACLU on behalf of the state of New Hampshire has filed a lawsuit, and they're arguing specific harm to individuals who could be affected by this executive order, particularly women who are pregnant, whose children might be born here. And they're arguing that this executive order on its face violates the U.S. Constitution. The only way to change the U.S. Constitution is to actually have the House and the Senate and our legislative body both of them through a supermajority vote to change an amendment, and then it has to go to the states, the 50 states of the United States, and three-fourths of the states have to ratify that change. None of this process has begun. And so there's litigation just challenging his authority to do so. In all of those cases, the judges that have heard the cases put a pause on this executive order called a temporary restraining order, basically telling the administration that they could not go forward with this order until the courts actually made a ruling on whether or not this action was constitutional. The administration has challenged this temporary pause and argued that it should not apply to everyone in the United States. At the very least, it should only apply to the individuals that are named in the litigation. And that issue has made its way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court right now is looking at whether or not these judges can issue a nationwide pause, or they can only issue a pause in the jurisdictions in which the courts is residing over. And why that's important is, in order for a judge to issue this temporary pause, they have to decide, they have to make a finding. They have to decide whether or not the plaintiffs, the people bringing the lawsuit, would be irreparably harmed if they did not get the pause, if this executive order was not stopped. And which means that harm could happen to them before the case is decided that cannot be fixed. Second, they also have to show that there's a likelihood that they're going to succeed on the actual case before the court in order for the court to grant this extraordinary measure. And so in all of those cases, the court has found there would be harm, and the plaintiffs are likely to succeed on the merits of the case. So they actually haven't addressed the actual merits, but they are looking at it. So that is currently where that litigation stands. There's also been litigation that's being brought about the ability of the